name is Omobonale Alunge. Today I'm here to present to you my understanding of perspectives in psychology, which includes definition of psychology, overview of psychology, the introduction of psychological perspectives, type of psychological perspectives. My table of contents are as follows. A description of psychological perspectives, an evaluation of the key assumptions of the identified psychological perspectives, an evaluation of the work of key theorists relating to each of the identified psychological perspectives, an analysis of the similarities and differences between the two perspectives in psychology, an evaluation of the application of two perspectives to contemporary issues in psychology. Overview of psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior. It seeks to understand how people think, feel, and act in different situations. Because human behavior is complex, psychologists use different viewpoints, called perspective, to understand behavior more fully. Psychological perspectives. Psychological perspectives offer framework for understanding human thoughts, feeling, and behavior. Type of psychological perspectives. We have 7 types of psychological perspective: biological, behavioral, cognitive, psychodynamic, humanistic, cross-cultural, and evolutionary. In this presentation, I will focus on 2 major perspectives: the behaviorist or behavioral perspective and the cognitive perspective. Description of the 2 psychological perspectives. Behaviorist perspective. The behaviorist perspective, also called behaviorism, this perspective believes that behavior is learned from the external environment through conditioning, stimulus-response association, reinforcement, and punishment. Instead of looking inside the mind, it focuses on what we can actually see people do. Key ideas include classical conditioning, learning through association, where a neutral stimulus becomes linked with an unconditioned stimulus. Operant conditioning, learning through consequences, where behavior increases or decreases depending on reinforcement or punishment. For example, an individual might learn to fear a stimulus because it has been paired with an unpleasant event. Cognitive perspective. The cognitive view is all about how our mind works. It looks at how we think, remember, make decisions, solve problems, and use language. According to this perspective, our thoughts strongly influence our behaviors. This perspective developed partially as a reaction to behaviorism, which ignored mental processes. Cognitive psychologists compare the mind to a computer, suggesting that people actively receive, process, store, and retrieve information. Evaluation of the key assumption of each perspective. Behaviorist perspective, key assumptions and evaluation. Key assumptions. Behavior can be studied scientifically by focusing on observable action rather than introspection. All behavior is learned from the environment through conditioning. Internal mental states, e.g., thought or emotion, are not reliable scientific data and are therefore excluded. Evaluation. Strengths. By focusing on observable behavior and experimental method, the behaviorist perspective helps make psychology more scientific and measurable. It has clear practical applications, e.g., behavior modification, classroom management, and treatment for phobias. Limitations. It oversimplifies human behavior by ignoring mental and emotional processes. It cannot fully explain complex behavior, such as language development or problem solving. It underestimates biological influences, genetic or innate processes. Cognitive perspective. Key assumptions. Mental processes such as schemas, memory, attention, decision making can and should be scientifically studied, even though they are internal and not directly observable. Behavior is influenced by how information is processed and represented in the mind, that is, perception, interpretation, reasoning, rather than simply by external stimuli and reinforcement. People are active rather than passive. Information processors, they select, organize, transform, and retrieve information with external representation after behavior. Evaluation. Strengths. It provides a richer account of human thinking, language, memory, and problem solving than behaviorism. It has led to useful therapeutic applications, e.g., cognitive behavioral therapy and educational strategies. Limitations. It can sometimes ignore emotion, motivation, social factors, and unconscious influences. It is sometimes viewed as too mechanical when comparing the mind to a computer. Laboratory studies don't always reflect real life situations. Evaluation of the work of key theories for each perspective. John B. Watson, 1878 to 1958, is often considered the founder of behaviorism. He argued that psychology must be abandoned, introspection, and focus on observable behavior. He famously claimed, "Give me a dozen healthy infants and I will guarantee to train them to become any type of specialist, regardless of their talent." Watson, 1930. To illustrate that behavior is shaped entirely by environment. B. F. Skinner, 1904 to 1990, extended behaviorism with operant conditioning. Behavior is shaped by consequences, reinforcement, or punishment, and he developed the schema box to systematically study this. Evaluation of behaviorist theorists. Watson and Skinner's work contributed significantly to experimental methodology and applied behavioral intervention. For example, behavior modification programs in education, therapy, and behavior management owe much to their principles. Cognitive theories. Jean Piaget, 1896 to 1980, proposed the stage theory of cognitive development in children: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational, emphasizing how children gradually build mental schemas and logical thoughts through interaction with environments. Ulrich Nelson. Nelson is known as the father of cognitive psychology for bringing together research on memory, perception, and cognition in his influential book, Cognitive Psychology, 1967. His work helped launch the cognitive revolution. Evaluation of cognitive theories. Piaget changed how we understand children's thinking by showing that they develop through stages and actively build knowledge. His ideas shaped modern education. However, researchers argue he sometimes underestimated children's abilities and that in theory doesn't always apply across different cultures. Nelson helped establish cognitive psychology as a scientific field by showing that mental processes like memory and perception can be studied scientifically. His work strengthened research into how the mind works. But early cognitive models he supported were criticized for being too mechanical and for overlooking emotions and real life behavior. an analysis of the similarities and differences between the two perspectives in psychology. Both perspectives aims to explain human behavior, what people do, think, and feel in systematic ways. Both have generated testable theories and empirical research, and both have practical applications: education, therapy, behavior change. The Venn diagram indicates the differences and the similarities. Key differences between behaviorist and cognitive perspectives. Features: behaviorist perspective and cognitive perspective. Focus: behaviorist perspective focus on observable behavior, stimulus response, link and reinforcement, while cognitive perspective internal mental processes, thinking, memory, attention, problem solving. View of learning: in behaviorist perspective, learning is shaped by environmental conditioning, classical and operant. In cognitive perspective, learning involves active mental processing and constructing meaning. Role of mental state in behaviorist perspective. Mental states are not considered essential. Focus on what can be observed. While in cognitive perspective, mental states are central. Schemas, thoughts, and representation guide actions. Research methods in behaviorist perspective. It controls laboratory experiments, behavioral measurements. While in cognitive perspective, experiments, cognitive tasks, modeling, sometimes neurocognitive methods. Strengths and limitation. In behaviorist perspective, the strength: clear, measurable behavioral principle for behavior change. While in cognitive strength, rich explanation of cognition and information processes. The limitation in behaviorist perspective: reductionist ignores internal mental processes, while in cognitive perspective, limitation may overlook context, environment, and emotion. Continuation of key differences between the behaviorist and cognitive perspectives. While behaviorist and cognitive approaches share the scientific ambition, their underlying assumption mark a fundamental shift. Behaviorism sees the mind as a black box and emphasizes environment and conditioning. The cognitive perspective reopens the box and accepts that internal processes matter. In practice, they can complement each other, e.g., cognitive behavioral therapies combine behavioral and cognitive elements, but they differ in their emphasis, explanatory, scope, and methodological preferences. Evaluation of the application of the two perspectives to contemporary issues in psychology. Behaviorist perspective, application to contemporary issues. One prominent contemporary issue is behavior change, e.g., public health campaigns, addiction, classroom behavior. The behaviorist perspective underpins intervention using reinforcement, token economics, behavior modeling, and systematic desensitization for phobias, all grounded in conditioning. For example, exposure therapy for phobia draws on classical and operant conditioning principles. Behavioralist theory: to extinguish fear responses via repeated safe exposure, reinforcement, and non-fearful behavior. Evaluation: this perspective is very useful because it provides clear, concrete tools for changing undesirable behaviors and is amenable to measurement and evaluation. However, for complex contemporary issues such as mental health disorder involving cognition, emotion, and social context, e.g., depression, anxiety, trauma, pure behaviorist approaches may be insufficient as they may not address underlying cognitive or emotional processes. Cognitive perspective, application to contemporary issues. A key contemporary application is the use of cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) for mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and traumatic stress disorder. CBT integrates cognitive theory, how thought influence emotion and behavior, with behavioral strategies changing behavior and is strongly supported by research. Another application relates to educational psychology, using cognitive theory to improve memory and attention and problem solving, particularly in digital learning evaluation. These applications have transformed clinical practice and education. CBT is considered a frontline evidence-based treatment, and cognitive insights inform how people learn and process information. However, limitation remains. Many CBT recipients still relapse. Cognitive approaches may overlook biological, emotional, and social factors. Issues such as cost, access, and digital divide also restrict widespread use. For broader societal problems, cognitive explanation often needs support from other perspectives. Comparative evaluation. In contemporary psychology, the cognitive perspective is more effective for understanding mental processes and mental health, whereas the behaviorist perspective remains useful for modifying specific behavior. And integrated approaches combine both cognition and behavior, as seen in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Conclusion. In summary, the behaviorist and cognitive perspective each provide valuable but distinct lenses for understanding human behavior. The behaviorist perspective emphasizes observable learning and environment, whereas the cognitive perspective emphasizes internal mental processes. Key theories: Watson, Skinner, Piaget, Nelson provided foundational work in each domain. While they share the scientific ambition, practical orientation, they differ in focus, assumptions, and methodologies. In terms of application, behaviorist principles remain vital for behavior change programs and cognitive perspective, underpin modern therapies and educational design. For contemporary issues, both perspectives have strengths and limitations, and their integration often yield the most effective outcomes. Thank you for listening.